I grew up in a house filled with the warmth of family and the irresistible aroma of cooking meat. My family wasn't rich, not by a long shot, but one thing we never seemed to lack was food, specifically meat. It was a constant at every meal, from crispy bacon at breakfast to thick, savory roast for dinner. Grandma's meat pie was a particular favorite, a recipe she guarded like a dragon hoards treasure. Every Friday night, she'd make one for us, and I'd be the first in line to grab a steaming slice. It wasn't just us who loved it. I'd take leftovers to school, and my friends would practically fight over the pieces I shared. "Your grandma's meat pie is the best," they'd say, and I'd swell with pride, even though I had no idea what made it so special. Our family dinners were always lively. Mom and Dad would joke about how we were meat connoisseurs while my siblings and I stuffed our faces. It felt like a point of pride that, no matter how tight money was, our plates were always full. It wasn't until much later that I began to wonder how they managed it. But there was one rule in our house, the kind spoken in that half-serious, half-joking tone that makes a kid wonder if there's more to it. "Stay out of the basement," Dad would say with a wag of his finger, his tone light, but his eyes sharp. Mom was less subtle. "No exceptions," she'd chime in, especially if we were near the door. Even Grandma, whose usual demeanor was all warm hugs and laughter, would frown if one of us lingered too long in the hallway where the basement door stood, an unassuming barrier painted the same dull cream as the walls around it. "Nothing down there for you," she'd say curtly, her tone a clear warning to drop the subject. It became a sort of joke among us kids. "Don't go to the basement, or the boogeyman will get you," my older brother Tom once teased. But beneath the jokes was an unspoken understanding that the rule wasn't to be broken. Still, I couldn't help being curious. I was the youngest of four, and curiosity was practically my job. I'd press my ear against the door sometimes, hoping for a hint of what might be so secretive down there. Usually, I heard nothing, but every once in a while, there'd be something. At first, I convinced myself it was my imagination. Late at night, when the house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the creak of the old pipes, I thought I heard faint moans or muffled cries. They were so soft, I wasn't even sure I'd heard them, but they sent shivers down my spine. I asked about it once, casually, during dinner. "Do the pipes ever, make weird noises? Like crying?" My parents exchanged a glance, the kind that spoke volumes without words. Dad chuckled, his tone overly casual. "Old house, old pipes. You know how it is." "Probably raccoons," Tom added, smirking as he tossed a pea at me. "Raccoons don't cry," I shot back, but the conversation was already over. The sounds didn't come often, but when they did, they stuck with me. They weren't like any noise I'd ever heard. They were faint but filled with something desperate. Once, when I mentioned it again, Mom said it was just the wind, though I couldn't remember the last time a breeze made me want to run and hide. The more I thought about it, the more the basement door seemed to loom, like it was daring me to open it. I started noticing little things I hadn't before. How the door was always locked, how the air seemed colder in that hallway, how Mom would stiffen if anyone lingered near it too long. One night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I decided to investigate. I told myself I wasn't breaking the rules. I was just curious, barefoot and cautious. I crept down the hall, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would wake the whole house. The basement door looked especially ordinary in the dim light, almost mockingly so. I hesitated, pressing my ear against it. At first, there was nothing, just silence. But then a noise. It was soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. A low, plaintive moan like someone crying in the distance. My heart raced as I pressed closer, straining to hear more. Then it came. A sharp, metallic clang echoed from behind the door, so loud and sudden that I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. The sound reverberated through the hallway, a violent contrast to the quiet of the house. I froze, waiting for something, anything, to follow. But there was only silence. I bolted back to my room, slamming the door behind me and diving under the covers. My heart wouldn't stop racing, and every creak of the house felt like something coming for me. The next morning, the basement door looked as ordinary as ever. No one mentioned any strange noises, and I didn't dare bring it up. But from that night on, The basement wasn't just a rule I had to follow. It was a secret I needed to uncover, no matter how much it scared me. I always looked up to my older siblings. Tom, the eldest, was practically a superhero to me when I was a kid. He could fix a bike chain, climb the tallest trees, and talk Mom into letting us stay up late to watch movies. Then there was Anna, who always knew how to calm me down when I was scared and made up funny stories when we couldn't fall asleep. Even Mia, just 2 years older than me, had this cool, rebellious streak I admired. But something changed when they turned 14. It wasn't immediate, but it was noticeable. Tom was the first. One evening, our parents called him into the living room after dinner. "It's time," Dad said, and Tom, looking nervous but curious, followed them. When he came back later that night, something was different. He didn't joke around like he usually did. His easy smile seemed forced, his laughs hollow. Over the next few weeks, he became quieter and more serious, especially when it came to the basement. Once, when Mia and I were playing tag in the hallway, I accidentally bumped into the basement door. Tom appeared out of nowhere, gripping my shoulder hard. "Don't touch it," he said, his voice low and firm. "I wasn't going to." "Just don't," he snapped before walking away. Anna was next. When her turn came, I wasn't as naive. I watched closely, hoping to figure out what time meant. That night, when she came back, her face was pale, and she barely ate at breakfast the next morning. She started spending more time in her room and spoke less to me, though she became fiercely protective any time the basement was mentioned. By the time Mia's 14th birthday rolled around, I was more anxious than curious. She had always been carefree, but after her trip downstairs, her personality shifted. It wasn't as dramatic as Tom's or Anna's, but there was a guardedness to her I'd never seen before. She'd also started giving me these strange, knowing looks whenever I asked questions about the basement. "You'll understand when it's your turn," she said once, patting my head like I was a little kid. I hated that. I wasn't a little kid. I wanted answers, but no one would give them to me. It was a Saturday morning when I saw it. A thin streak of dark red smeared along the frame of the basement door. I froze, staring at it, my mind racing. It was dried but fresh enough to be unmistakable. Blood. My first thought was that someone had cut themselves, but why hadn't they cleaned it up? And why would it be on the basement door? I reached out to touch it, curiosity overriding my unease. But just as my fingers grazed the edge, Tom appeared behind me. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharp, startling me so much that I jumped. "In nothing," I stammered, stepping back. He glanced at the blood, then at me. His expression darkened. "You shouldn't be here," he said, gripping my arm. His hand was strong, almost painfully so. "What's that on the door?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "None of your business," he said. Then, softer, "You'll understand when you're older." The same phrase, over and over again. It wasn't an answer, just a wall to keep me out. I didn't press further, but the suspicion had rooted itself deep in my mind. That afternoon, I went to the kitchen to help Grandma with her famous meat pie. It was one of the few times I felt normal, like nothing strange was happening in the house. "Hand me the pepper, sweetheart," she said as she rolled out the dough. I obeyed, watching as she worked her magic. Grandma had a way of making everything look effortless, from the perfect lattice crust to the savory filling that smelled like heaven. "What makes it so good?" I asked, hoping to distract myself from the morning's discovery. "It's the seasoning," she said with a wink. "Yeah, but what's in it?" Her hands froze for just a second, barely noticeable, but I caught it. She recovered quickly, smiling down at me. "That's a family secret," she said. "Come on, Grandma," I teased. "You can tell me." "Not this time," she said, ruffling my hair. "Just enjoy it, sweetheart. Some things are better left unknown." Her tone was light, but her words lingered. That night, the pie sat heavy in my stomach as I tossed and turned in bed. My thoughts kept circling back to the blood, Tom's warning, and Grandma's cryptic words. When I finally fell asleep, it was restless. In my dream, I was standing in front of the basement door, the hallway stretching endlessly in both directions. The door creaked open on its own, revealing stairs that seemed to descend forever. I stepped inside, compelled by something I couldn't name. The air grew colder as I descended, the darkness pressing against me like a living thing. At the bottom, I found myself in a room covered in dirt and blood. Bones, human bones, were scattered everywhere. A soft moan echoed through the space, followed by a raspy whisper, "Help me." I turned, and there in the corner was a figure, a person, or what was left of them. Their eyes locked onto mine, and I realized with dawning horror that I recognized their face. It was me. I woke up screaming, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Mom and Dad rushed into the room, their faces filled with concern. "What happened?" Mom asked, sitting on the edge of my bed. "It was just a bad dream," Dad said, his voice calm and soothing. "Don't worry, it'll all make sense soon." That phrase again, it didn't comfort me. If anything, it made the knot in my stomach tighten. As they tucked me back into bed and turned off the light, I stared at the ceiling, dreading what my 14th birthday might bring. My 14th birthday started like any other. Balloons hung in the kitchen, and my siblings sang off-key as I blew out the candles on a cake Grandma had baked. It was chocolate, my favorite. For a brief moment, everything felt normal, like we were just a regular family celebrating another milestone. But as the day wore on, that feeling began to shift. Mom and Dad kept exchanging glances, their smiles too wide, their voices too cheerful. Tom, Anna, and Mia hovered around me like shadows, their excitement almost palpable. Every now and then, one of them would pat my shoulder or squeeze my arm, murmuring, "You're going to love this." By the time the sun began to set, my stomach was a knot of anxiety. "Come on, sweetheart," Dad said after dinner, his voice unusually soft. "It's time." The room seemed to hold its breath. I felt every eye on me as I stood, my legs trembling beneath me. "Time for what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mom placed a hand on my back, guiding me toward the hallway. "Just trust us," she said. "You'll understand soon." The basement door loomed ahead, its dull cream paint worn around the edges. Dad unlocked it with a key he pulled from his pocket, and the creak of the hinges sent a shiver down my spine. Tom, standing behind me, gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "It's okay," he said, his smile unsettlingly calm. "We all went through it. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but follow them down those stairs. But my feet moved on their own, step by step, as the darkness swallowed us. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was a thick, choking stench, a mix of rot, metal, and something else I couldn't place. My eyes watered as we descended, the dim glow of a single bulb casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. When we reached the bottom, I froze. The room was massive, far larger than I'd imagined. The walls were lined with hooks, some of them holding chunks of meat wrapped in plastic. A table stood in the center, stained dark with blood. Piles of bones, clean, white, and unmistakably human, were stacked in the corners. I couldn't move. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. That smell, I managed to choke out. "Familiar, isn't it?" Mom said, her voice warm and proud. My legs gave out, and I stumbled back against the wall. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Dad knelt beside me, his expression soft but serious. "This is what keeps our family together," he said. "This is how we survive." "What are you talking about?" My voice cracked, rising in panic. Mom stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "We've always been a family of meat lovers," she said. "But meat is expensive, especially when times are tough." She gestured to the room around us. "So we found an alternative." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Every steak, every roast, every bite of Grandma's famous pie, they weren't just food. They were people. I doubled over, gagging, as ball rose in my throat. "It's not as bad as you think," Anna said, her voice almost soothing. "Once you get used to it, it's just normal." "Normal?" I looked up at her, horrified. "How can you say that?" She didn't answer, just smiled that same eerie smile Tom and Mia had given me. Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. "We don't take just anyone," he said, as if that made it better. "Runaways, drifters, people no one will miss. We're careful. Careful. Like that made it okay." "Why?" I croaked, my throat raw. "Why would you do this?" "To keep us fed," Mom said simply. "To keep us together." You love our meals, don't you? You've always said how much you love my cooking. I wanted to scream, to tell them how twisted and wrong this all was. But the words caught in my throat. My siblings watched me with a mix of pity and expectation. They had all been through this, I realized. They had stood in this very spot, faced the same horrifying truth. You'll get used to it, Tom said, his voice calm. We all did, but I didn't want to get used to it. I didn't want to be a part of this. The room felt like it was closing in, the stench of blood and rot suffocating me. My head spun and my stomach churned. I barely made it to the edge of the room before I threw up, my body rejecting everything I had ever eaten. I bolted up the stairs, ignoring their calls for me to come back. When I reached my room, I locked the door and collapsed onto the floor, my chest heaving with sobs. Images of the basement burned in my mind. Bloodied hooks, pale bones, my family's calm, smiling faces. This wasn't a bad dream. It was real, and I had no idea what to do. I didn't sleep that night. How could I, after what I'd seen? Every time I closed my eyes, the image of the blood-soaked basement burned into my mind. The smell of death seemed to cling to my skin, no matter how many times I scrubbed my hands raw in the bathroom sink. By the time the first pale light of dawn seeped through my window, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't stay. Not after this. Not after knowing the truth about what my family had been doing and eating all these years. The house was still silent when I slipped out of bed and pulled on my shoes. My heart hammered as I eased my bedroom door open, the creak of the hinges sounding impossibly loud. I froze, listening for any sign of movement, but the hallway remained still. With a deep breath, I crept down the stairs and out the front door, the cool morning air hitting my face like a slap. I didn't look back. The walk to the police station felt like a dream. My legs were trembling so badly I could barely keep moving, and every sound, a car engine, a bird call, sent me spinning around, expecting to see one of my siblings or parents following me. By the time I stumbled through the doors of the station, I was a mess, sweaty, tear-streaked, and gasping for breath. I need to report a crime. I blurted out to the officer at the desk. The words spilled out of me in a torrent about the basement, the bones, the meat pies. I described everything I'd seen, my voice shaking as I begged them to help. The officer's expression shifted from concern to something more guarded, but she nodded and led me to a room where I repeated my story to two detectives. They asked questions, their tones calm but skeptical. We'll send someone to check it out, one of them finally said, standing up. Wait here. Relief washed over me. They believed me, didn't they? Two officers escorted me back to the house. As we pulled into the driveway, dread coiled in my stomach. The house looked as ordinary as ever, its cream-colored siding and flower-filled garden betraying none of the horrors within. My parents were waiting on the porch, their faces masks of confusion and concern. Officers, Dad said, his tone polite but firm. What's this about? I stayed behind the officers as they explained the report. Mom gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. Our child said that? Oh no, there must be some mistake. The officers asked to see the basement, and my parents hesitated just long enough for me to blurt out. They're hiding something. It's all down there. With a sigh, Dad unlocked the basement door and led the way down. My legs felt like jelly as I followed the officers. I was ready for them to see the bloodstains, the bones, the meat hooks, ready for their shock, their horror. But when the lights flicked on, the basement was empty. No hooks, no meat, no bones, just bare walls, a cement floor, and a faint smell of bleach. You see, Mom said, wringing her hands, there's nothing here. Our child has been struggling lately. We've been so worried. I stared at her, my jaw dropping. That's not true. It was here. All of it. They must have cleaned it up. The officers exchanged glances. One of them placed a hand on my shoulder. Sometimes, when people are under stress, their minds can play tricks on them, she said gently. I'm not making it up. I screamed, twisting away. They're lying. But it didn't matter. The police left after a few more cursory questions, and my parents dragged me back inside, their loving facade cracking the moment the door closed. You've put us all in danger, Dad hissed, his face inches from mine. I didn't know what else to do. I cried. How could you expect me to just accept this? Mom sighed, looking tired and sad. We knew this might happen. Some of you take it harder than others. I froze. What does that mean? They didn't answer, but later that night, as I hid in my room, I heard them talking in the kitchen. Do you think we can trust them now? Mom whispered. No, Daddy Blade. We'll have to do something about it. Before it's too late. My blood ran cold. They weren't just angry. I was a threat to their secret. And I knew exactly how they handled threats. The next day, my siblings wouldn't look me in the eye. When I cornered Mia, she just shook her head. I'm sorry, she said, tears brimming in her eyes. It's your turn to help the family. I stood in the darkened hallway, the house eerily silent except for the faint creaks of settling wood. My family was asleep. I could hear the faint murmur of my dad snoring from the master bedroom, the occasional rustle of movement from my siblings' rooms. In my hand, I clutched the gas can I'd taken from the shed. The metallic smell of gasoline stung my nose, blending with the faint, lingering scent of my grandmother's cooking. I didn't want to do this, but I didn't see any other way. My hands shook as I poured the gasoline onto the carpet, the liquid soaking into the fibers and spreading in dark, uneven stains. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, each moment stretching into eternity as I worked my way through the house. The living room, the dining room, the stairs. I hesitated outside my parents' bedroom, the gas canister lighter now, but not yet empty. My mother's soft breathing reached my ears, steady and calm. This was my family, my blood, but they'd made me part of something monstrous. They'd asked me to carry a secret I couldn't live with, one that had already stained my hands and my soul. Tears blurred my vision as I splashed the last of the gasoline across the doorframe. I stood in the center of the hallway, my chest heaving, my fingers fumbling with the box of matches. For a moment, I thought I couldn't do it. My hand froze, trembling, the match poised against the striker. Then I thought of the basement, the bones, the blood, the faces of my siblings as they said, "It's your turn to help the family." I struck the match. The flames took hold faster than I expected. A faint glow turned into a roaring blaze, the heat washing over me in waves. Smoke began to fill the hallway, thick and choking, as the fire spread, consuming everything in its path. I stumbled toward the front door, coughing and blinking through the tears streaming down my face. The heat scorched my skin, the sound of crackling wood and shattering glass deafening in my ears. Somewhere behind me, I heard my mother scream. I don't remember collapsing on the lawn. When I woke, it was to a world of chaos. The house was a towering inferno, flames leaping into the night sky as neighbors gathered on the street, their faces pale and horrified. Someone was holding me down, their voice urgent, but I couldn't make out the words over the sound of sirens wailing in the distance. The pain hit me in waves, my arms, my legs, my face. The fire hadn't spared me entirely. "Stay with me," someone said, their face swimming into view. "A neighbor, maybe. Help is coming." I woke again in a hospital room, the steady beep of machines filling the silence. My arms were wrapped in bandages, my skin raw and blistered. A nurse hovered nearby, her expression a mix of pity and caution. "They're here to talk to you," she said softly, stepping aside to reveal two detectives. I told them everything. The basement, the bones, the meat pies, how my family had been feeding me lies, and something far worse, my entire life. But when they went to investigate, they found nothing. The fire had reduced the house to ash, leaving no trace of the horrors I'd seen. No evidence, no proof. The media had a field day. "Troubled teen burns down family home," the headline screamed. Psychotic break or hidden trauma? No one believed me. Weeks passed before I was discharged from the hospital. I moved in with a distant relative, someone who looked at me like I was a broken thing they didn't know how to fix. I tried to rebuild my life, but it was like living in the shadow of a nightmare I couldn't escape. I couldn't sleep without hearing the screams, couldn't close my eyes without seeing the flames, and I couldn't eat meat. At first, it was revulsion. The smell, the texture, it all brought back memories of the basement. But even as the revulsion faded, something else took its place. Disappointment. No matter how hard I tried, no meat ever tasted right. I've been a vegetarian for years now. People assume it's because of the trauma, and I let them believe that. It's easier than explaining the truth. The truth is, I don't eat meat because I can't. Because no matter how much I try, no meat tastes as good as Grandma's pie. Thanks for watching. If you like the story, click like, subscribe to the channel, and write an idea for the next story in the comments.